panelist. Cool. Let me just get started on this part. Okay, so in this section, we'll be discussing more about the DMS components. What are the components? We discussed about replication instance, the tasks. I know it can be confusing at earlier stage. We'll be discussing more about it. I'll also be coordinating within a demo as well, so that if I'm explaining something, if I'm explaining a component here, I explain that in the demo as well. So you will get to relate with a practical session as well. Then we'll be discussing about the options, the use cases, and the best practices when it comes to database migration. Okay, so overview. What we have discussed before the break. We have discussed that as far as DMS is concerned, it's relatively quite simple to use. It involves near zero minimal downtime, and we support large variety of database that you can use to migrate from one source to another. It's quite cheap when it comes to commercial tools that are available out there. It's way cheap, and it's fast and easy to set up. Within 10 minutes you can set up your initial replication, and you can test it out, and it's quite reliable. It uses the AWS infrastructure and AWS services and tools through which you can perform the migration. Coming to the first part, why do I say it's simple to use? It's quite simple to use because you don't have to install any drivers, you don't have to install any applications like you have to do with third-party sources. All the changes in the source database can be easily replicated to the target with just a few clicks. You can set up a migration. I'll show that in the demo session as well. And all the complexity of the migration, almost all the complexity is managed by DMS. In case there are any complex manual things need to be performed, schema conversion tool can assist in that case as well and can do the migration in that case as well. Using DMS, you can automatically replicate the changes. You don't have to store those changes at some place or some logs, and you don't have to manually do that. It can be done automatically, and you can use it for your continuous replication. Coming to the minimal downtime, depending on your source, depending on your target, you can have migration and then you can have replication as well using DMS. And then you can, at any point of time, cut over your application from one source to the target. We support wide variety of databases that you can see in our documentation. We also discussed about the cost part, and we discussed that how easy it is for you to set up the migration. I'll show you a heterogeneous migration, and I'll show you how easy and quick it is to migrate from one type of database to another type of database. Coming to the reliability part, you can monitor everything starting from your resources, whether compute, memory, storage resources are being throttled, what is the utilization there. You can also have monitoring for your task, how many rows were transferred, all kinds of monitoring I'm going to show you during our demo session. You can use CloudWatch for that. We also have multi-AZ available for replication instances when it comes to DMS. We'll discuss more about that part as well. So you can have high availability with DMS as well. Coming to the DMS components, the main three DMS components that we need to know, that we need to understand, are replication instance, the endpoint, and the task. So let me do one thing. Let me begin by showing you a small demo of heterogeneous migration, and through that we'll be able to relate these slides very easily. Okay, so let me begin by showing you or by connecting to my source first. Just 1 second. Okay, so let me begin by showing you what kind of source I have currently set up. So what I did today morning is I created an EC2 instance, and I had set up a MySQL database inside that EC2 instance. Let me just quickly connect to that instance and show you the data that I have, sample data that I've created in my MySQL database. I'll be performing a migration from source as MySQL and target as Postgres. Both are open source. You can also leverage the playbooks in case you want to migrate from some other source to some other target. This is just to show you how easy it is to migrate. Okay, seems like the console is loading. We have a little bit of bandwidth constraint here, but no worries. Okay, so I had set up this MySQL server, this Linux instance where I had set up this MySQL server. So we can see that the IP of the server is ending with 2992. Let me just quickly connect to that instance. Okay, so I'm currently connected to that instance, which has the the IP ending with 2992. Let me just quickly connect to my MySQL database, and let me just show you what data I have inserted. Okay, so now you can see that the employee database is currently there on this source MySQL database that I've created on the EC2 instance. So what you can assume is that this MySQL database is an on-premise system. I'm going to use the public IP of this EC2 instance, and similarly, you can use the public IP of your on-premise system, and you can migrate accordingly. So you can assume that this MySQL server is an on-premise system, although it's in an EC2 instance, but migrating from on-premise system should be exactly similar. Okay, let me just show you the tables that are there in this employees database. So we have in this employee database, we have these couple of tables that are already there in these in this source MySQL database. Okay, so this is just a summary of what our source is. Let me just quickly jump into my DMS console, and let me show you how you can perform a migration there. So from the console, now I'm going to the database migration service. So what is the first thing that you need to do? The first thing that you need to do is you need to tell the DMS service that this is my source, and you can leverage these configurations or this username, password, this IP in order to connect to the source. Definitely DMS service will need those information to connect to the source as well as to the target. Okay, so let me just quickly point you to the first thing, which is called as endpoint. So what is endpoint? Endpoint is basically, you can understand, it's a set of configuration which allows the DMS service to get to know where your source or where your target is and how can it connect to the source or the target. So you can understand endpoint to be just a set of configurations. So if I try to start with it, let me just quickly feed in all the values. So first thing is endpoint identifier. So it has nothing to do with DMS. It's just for you so that you can use this particular field to understand what was the endpoint that I had set. Let me just put it to DMS workshop source MySQL. So my source as of now, as I mentioned, is MySQL. What is my server name or the server IP? Let me just quickly copy that from our EC2 instance. I can feed in the source IP here, then the port. Currently, my MySQL server is running in this port, so I'm feeding in 3306. Do you need to have SSL? So I mentioned when it comes to security, you can encrypt the migration as well. So in case you want to encrypt, you can use SSL for encryption in transit, and you can use these options in case you want to use SSL. What was my username? My username was root, and my password was something that I've entered. Coming to the EC2 console, let me just copy the public IP of this particular instance. Okay, seems like due to this COVID situation, all of us are facing bandwidth issues, but no worries, this should be over soon. Okay, so I'm copying the public IP here. and I'm feeding this public IP because my MySQL server is running in this instance in under this port. Then you have endpoint specific setting in case you want to have any attributes. We'll discuss more about what an extra connection attribute is, but if you want to configure your DMS to have some kinds of extra configurations while connecting to the DMS endpoint, you can leverage this. Then you have the KMS master key that can be used for encryption. Then you have tagging option in case you want to tag your endpoint, and then you have the connectivity thing. I'll discuss more about the connectivity thing, but first let me just quickly create this endpoint. Okay, now that my source has been created, as you can see, DMS workshop source MySQL has now been created. Let me just quickly jump into the target. In order to perform a migration, you should have a fresh, or you should at least have a target which is there. So the target that I defined earlier, I'll be using Postgres here, and it will be a completely new instance without any data. Let me just confirm it to you as well. So ideally, what you can understand from this migration is that we are just kind of performing an on-premise migration to an AWS migration, and we are having a heterogeneous migration here. We are migrating from a source MySQL engine to a target Postgres engine. Okay, the page is loading. Just 1 second on that part. Okay, while it is loading, let me just quickly connect to that host as well. Okay, seems like a bandwidth issue. Okay, cool. So we can see that this particular instance DMS-PG-T is created, and I created this today morning itself. Let me just quickly show you whether any data is there in that instance or not. So you can see what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to connect to this particular host, which is the instance that I had created, the RDS instance, and I'm using PSQL tool. You can use any client in order to connect, and then I'm mentioning the port and the username and the initial database. Let me just quickly connect to that and show you the tables that we have. Okay, so we can clearly see that as of now in DB name, there are no relations or no tables currently to be found. Okay, so now we have established that in source we have couple of tables, but we do not have those tables in the target. Let me just quickly proceed to the DMS service. So if you remember, we had created this source endpoint. So in order to work, in order for the DMS to connect to the end target database, we also need a target endpoint. So when it comes to RDS, you can simply select this option, which will automatically populate all the related values for you, most of the related values for you, and you can use that in order to create the endpoint. Again, we just have an source identifier. So let me just put into DMS workshop target Postgres. Then we have the target engine, which is Postgres. We have the server name, which can be an IP or a DNS name. In case of RDS, you may want to feed the endpoint itself. And we have a port. We have the configuration that you can use to set up SSL. Then we have the username that DMS can leverage to connect. And then we have the password. Let me just quickly feed in that value. And then you have the database name, the initial database name that you can use to connect to Postgres. So whenever you're connecting to Postgres, you need to feed this value. Similarly, we have all other configurations as well. Let me just quickly create this as well. Okay, so now if you see, we have these two endpoints created, which is one is the source, which is in my Linux EC2 instance, and one is the Postgres, which is in my RDS instance. Okay, so in order to perform a migration, we need to have a replication instance. So replication instance is basically a host, basically a set of compute, memory, and storage resources that the DMS service can leverage in order for the migration to complete, in order for the migration, conversion, replication, all sort of things to complete. For that, what you need to do is you need to create a replication instance. Again, just repeating on that part, as of now, we created the source endpoint, then we created the target endpoint, and now I'm creating the replication instance. This replication instance will also be responsible for connecting to the source and connecting to the target. I'll show more details on that part. So let me just quickly feed in a couple of values. So first is the name. Name is nothing but just something through which you can recognize different instances. Then you have instance classes. As we discussed, you have T series, you have C series, and R series, depending on your workload, depending on what kind of migration suits you. You can leverage these instance classes. So it can be a very common question that what kind of instance class do we need for a particular migration? How do we get to know is it memory intensive or not? The simple answer to it, and the only answer to it, is you need to test it out. When it comes to migration, you need to go through a lot of phases of testing, and you need to test out which instance class suits for your workload. Through our CloudWatch metrics, you can see whether memory is being utilized a lot, or compute is being utilized a lot, or if you need burstable capacity or not. Then you have the engine version. We generally recommend customers to go with the latest generally available version so that they can get all the bug fixes and optimizations. Then you have the allocated storage, where your changes or where your migrated data will be first stored and then migrated to the target. You can set it to your required value. Then comes the VPC part, where your replication instance will reside, and then comes the multi-AZ part. Similarly to how we discussed yesterday about RDS multi-AZ, we have multi-AZ in replication instance as well, which will allow you to have minimal downtime in case any availability zone goes down, in case the primary fails. So you can set it to multi-AZ, or you can set it to off as well. Then we have public accessibility. It's exactly the same as what we discuss in RDS. It just provides an public IP to your replication instance, so that you can the replication can reach out to your resources that are kept in internet. Okay, so apart from that, we have other configurations as well. The first thing is the replication subnet group. It's basically a set of subnets of your VPC in which your multi-AZ instance can be placed. Then you have a preference of availability zone, the security groups that you can attach in order to restrict the communication, and then you have the KMS master key. Then you have a maintenance window that you can set, and you can also go with the minor version automatic upgrade. In case you want to go for it, you can go for this as well. So DMS will automatically upgrade the minor version of your DMS instance. The replication instance, this engine version, it will automatically upgrade in this maintenance window. Then you have tagging system as well, and then you can ultimately create the instance. In order to save time for you folks, I've already created a replication instance as it takes a couple of minutes for the instance to get created. So I have created this instance RI331 of version 331, which is placed in our this VPC. Cool. So now we have three things ready. We have the source endpoint ready, we have the target endpoint ready, we have the replication instance ready. What should we do next? The first thing that we should do is, in the endpoint section, let us test out whether this particular replication instance where our migration will be performed is able to connect to the source or target or not. So let me just quickly go to the source and let me see whether the replication instance is able to connect or not. So let me just quickly go quickly show you how to do that. In the endpoint section, you can just select your endpoint. In the endpoint, you'll be able to see a connections tab. In the connections tab, you'll be able to see a test connection tab. In that test connection, you just select your replication instance and you click on run test. It might take a couple of seconds for this test to run, and it will happen in the background. In the meanwhile, I'll also go to the target endpoint, and I'll start a test connection for this endpoint as well. Let me just run a test of this endpoint. Okay. Seems like by mistake I pressed the reload button, so it's reloading now, but no worries there. Okay, so while this is being reloaded, we have created the source endpoint, target endpoint, the replication instance, and once we have the tests successful, we can proceed with the actual migration. Okay, let me just quickly see if the test connections were successful or not. Okay, so now that we can see that this particular endpoint, the connection to this particular endpoint through this replication instance was successful, we are good to go. Let me just quickly show you that for the target as well. Going in the connections tab, we can see that even the target, okay, that is currently testing. Okay, no worries there. Should be done soon. So it just takes a couple of seconds for the connections to be successful. Post that, we will start with our actual migration. Okay, so now we can see that the target is also successful. So let me just quickly point to the task. So task is the actual thing where you can specify the configurations, what you need to convert, whether you want to have any filter, whether you want to only migrate, whether you also want to replicate. All these configurations are set in the task. Before I go with start creation of our task, let me just quickly jump back to our slides in order to go in a flow. So the first thing that we discuss is the replication instance. We discussed about the instance classes. We discussed about the public or private IP, whatever we want to choose, and we discussed about the source and target endpoint that you can use to connect the replication instance to. Then we discussed about the endpoint part, where you just set the configurations, the source and the target configurations that DMS can leverage to perform the migration. There are a couple of advanced attributes as well, like the extra connection attributes that you can use to feed in extra information or extra configuration information as well. So these are the endpoint sources that you can connect. We are continuously optimizing and upgrading a service, so you might see a couple of source and targets as well. Okay, so we discussed about the sources. We discussed about we discussed about the endpoint. We discussed about the replication instance. The main thing comes is the task. The task is the part where you feed in all these values. The first thing is the name of your task. You can just feed any name, not a critical thing. Then comes the source and the target. What endpoint that you have created needs to be connected with the replication instance. So you'll feed that in your task. In the task, you'll feed a source endpoint, you'll feed a target endpoint. You can have multiple source endpoints, multiple target endpoints in your account. You need to feed that in your task as to which source should I migrate from to which target endpoint. Then you choose the migration type. Coming to the migration type, we discussed about full load, we discussed about CDC. Let me just repeat that part again. So full load is just migration. You take the data out of source, you migrate, you dump it into the target. This is called full load. What is CDC? CDC is change data capture, which is replication. Any changes that are happening on the source, changes, mind you, changes, not the entire data. Any changes that are happening on the source and are replicated to the target, and this is known as CDC. So what are the migration types that are available? First migration type is the existing data. That is full load. You can move the existing data from source and you can dump it to the target. This is the first type that you can select. Second type is a combination of moving the existing data as well as replicating the changes, which means full load plus CDC. You migrate the data that is already there on the source and you dump it on the target, and you also ensure that after that migration, all the changes that are coming after that dump are also replicated. So it's basically full load plus CDC. The last one is replicating the changes only, which is only CDC. So if I summarize it, the first point is full load, the second point is full load plus CDC, and the third point is CDC only. Then comes another value, which is called target preparation. So we have three kinds of target preparation that you can use. First thing is do nothing. What it means is, when you have the source, when you have the target, DMS will do nothing when it comes to the schema part. This is all related with the schema part. These three options, target preparation options, are only related with schema part. Do nothing means that before starting the task, DMS will not truncate or create a table or do anything on your target, and it assumes that the target already has a schema defined, which can be manual, which can be using schema conversion tool, whatever you want. It's already there on the target is what DMS assumes. The second thing is drop table on target. What it means is, before starting the DMS task, what it will do is it will see whether the table with the same name is already there or not. If it's already there, it will drop that table and it will create a fresh table on the target so that you can perform the migration. The third thing is truncate, which means DMS before starting a task will see whether on the target any table is there or not. If it's there and has some data, it will truncate that data. It will not create the table again, but it will only truncate the data that is there in those tables. So it can be confusing to understand what's the difference between the second point and the third point, which is drop table and truncate. So let me put it this way. When you're using drop table, it will delete the table and it will create the table depending on the preset configuration that are there in DMS. The data types, the schema will automatically be converted using DMS. But in case you want to use, maybe you want to migrate a string data type on the source to CLOB, or you want to migrate string type of data into text data type, you have these kind of manual requirements. What you need to do is you need to create a table in the target end. And if you choose drop table on target, it will drop that schema and it will create a schema of its own, which is something that you might not need. In that case, you can go for truncate table, wherein the schema will be as per your choice, but the data will be truncated. Okay, moving to the include lobs field. So what is a lob? Lob is a large object. It can be a text, it can be a huge string. These are the lob data types. And why do we have a specific field for this is because these are the data types that slow down the migration by a huge rate. So we have a different section for this as well. We have three options that you can choose. Either you can discard all the lobs, all the large object, all the strings, you can discard it, or you can have a full lob mode. Full lob mode means that the lobs, the large objects on your source will be migrated, will be replicated to its entirety. No matter how big the lobs is, I have seen customers having 1 GB, 2 GB of lobs as well for one field. And in those cases, full lob mode will assist you in migrating the full field that is there on the source to the target. Coming to the limited lob mode, this means a limited size of lob will be migrated for each field from source to the target. If the lob is 1 GB, but you have set a limitation of 500 MB, only 500 MB of lob will be migrated and replicated to the target. So what is the benefit of using limited lob mode? It leads to truncation of my data. So why would I ever use it? So limited lob mode is much faster when it compares to full lob mode, and that is the reason customers prefer going with limited lob mode. Okay, so now that we have discussed about these options, let's go into more details. We discussed about the migration type. The first one is migrate existing data, which is called full load. The second thing is existing data migration as well as replication of changes, which is called full load and CDC. The last thing is replicating changes only, which is called as CDC only. Then comes the target preparation mode, which we discussed, do nothing, which means that the DMS will do nothing before starting the task. And then comes drop table on target. DMS will drop all the target tables and recreate them before starting the migration. Then comes truncate, where the DMS will only truncate those tables before starting the migration. It will not delete those tables to the entirety, and you can preserve your schema structure. Then comes the lob mode. So either you can go with disregarding all the lobs, or you can have a full lob mode where you can migrate all the complete lobs regardless of their size to the target, or you can use limited lob mode. As it's mentioned here, this mode is faster than using full lob mode. Okay, so coming to some more details about the replication task, as I mentioned, task is the most important thing when it comes to replication. You can use multiple, you can have multiple replication instances in your account. You can have multiple source endpoints, target endpoints, but the task is the main thing that defines your migration. Task is the destination where you can feed all the configurations that you need to run your migration. So the task that you create needs to have three things. First is the source endpoint, second is the target endpoint, and third is the replication instance where the task will actually run. It can also be possible in DMS to run multiple tasks in parallel, and you can have task settings that we'll discuss during our demo session, which gives you complete control over performance and debugging. Okay, moving to the demo part. So during our demo, we created the endpoints. We created these two endpoints, DMS Workshop Source MySQL, DMS Workshop Target Postgres, and then we created this replication instance, RI331, and then we tested out this endpoint connectivity there with this replication instance. Let me begin with creating a task now and showing you how the migration is performed. We'll perform a successful migration initially, and then we'll also perform a migration where an error will come up, and I'll let you know how you can troubleshoot that. Okay, so first thing is the task identifier. You can name it to whatever you want, just for your own reference. Let me name it to DMS task DMS workshop, and then you need to choose the replication instance as we discussed, where your task will run, and then you need to choose the source. We created this source. Let me choose the target as well. Then comes the migration type. So either you can go with migrate existing data, or you can go with migrate existing data and replicate changes, or you can go with the CDC only option. So let me choose here migrate existing data, and then you have the option of whether you want to start the task automatically in after creation. So let me just quickly unselect this in order to show you how you can start it. Then comes the target table preparation mode. So remember, the target RDS Postgres instance that I created was fresh. No tables were there in that instance. Only the database was there. So I will need to select drop table on target, because do nothing and truncate will not work in this case. Coming to the lob part, since I'm migrating very less data, I can actually go for full lob mode, and I can migrate all my data that is there. Then we have an option of selecting the size of full lob mode, in how many chunks should I migrate the data. In case of limited lob mode, you can choose the maximum size of lob that can be migrated to the target. Let me just choose full lob mode for this migration. The other thing that is mentioned here is whether you want to enable validation or not. What validation will do is, validation will allow DMS to validate whether the migration was successful or not, whether all the records have been migrated or not, and in case any record was not transferred, what is the issue behind it. It will show you that as well. So let me quickly select that so that I can show you in the demo. The most important part is enable CloudWatch logs, and I would recommend you to enable that every time you create a task. Granted that it may lead to a couple of more charges, CloudWatch charges, but it's always recommended so that you can debug your task. Then comes one of the most important thing, which is called table mapping. And in this section, you can choose which schemas you want to migrate, which tables you want to migrate. You can have a selective approach here. So let me just quickly select enter a schema, and let me migrate all the schemas that are present using the percentage sign, all the tables in all the schemas as well, and the action should be include. So you can have a selection rule which can include a table. You can have an exclude rule as well. Not only that, you can have column filters as well. You can test it out in your own time, but let me just quickly show you the transformation rule. The next thing is transformation tool. What does it mean? Let me just choose one and let me show you how it shows. Okay. Okay. So I've feeded one transformation rule here, which is as simple as where the schema name is like employees and the table name is like nothing, rename it to a value of portal. So such kind of transformations also you can do in case you want to make any transformations before your data is replicated. You can do that as well. But since we don't need it here, let me just quickly delete it. Okay, so you have a couple of advanced settings as well. I'll not discuss more about this, but I'll give a brief about it. All of this is available in our documentation. So you can also have a couple of tables created in the target, which will allow you in getting more insight, debugging insights for your migration. We have fine tuning as well. You can load multiple tables in parallel during your full load. You can have consistency timeout, which is basically uh, the time that the DMS task will wait before starting the migration to ensure that the transactions on the source have been completed, have been committed successfully or not. Don't worry if you're not able to understand this. It's quite a deep dive concept for the DBAs to understand on this part, and it's completely available online. You can read it at your own time. Okay, we also have a tags a field here which you can feed. So let me just quickly create this particular task for you and show you how it works. Okay, so creation is currently in progress. It might take couple of seconds here. Let us just wait for a couple of seconds. It shouldn't take a lot of time here. It will be done soon. So fortunately, we are running before time here, and hopefully we'll also be able to discuss a couple of questions that are coming in. Okay. So while this is being created, maybe we can take 5 minutes of break again, and we can catch up after exactly 5 minutes of time.